Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back in time again, but this time, forget palm trees and Hollywood glitz. Tonight, we're heading north, right up to the windy shores of Lake Michigan, to visit a city that was still young, still raw, and about to face one of the greatest challenges in its history. I'm talking about Chicago, 150 years ago. Now, I've got to ask before we start, how's your day going so far? And where are you tuning in from? If you're actually from Chicago, I want you to drop a comment below and tell us you're representing one of the most fascinating cities in American history. And if you're from somewhere else, let me know too, because maybe we'll do your city next. All right, so picture this. Chicago in the mid-1800s wasn't the steel and glass skyline you know today. No Willis Tower, no bustling, magnificent mile. Instead, it was a small, scrappy town hugging the edge of Lake Michigan. Muddy streets, wooden houses, and a population growing faster than it could handle. Immigrants poured in from Ireland, Germany, Poland, Italy. People looking for work, for stability, for a piece of the American dream. But here's the twist. This city, barely out of its childhood, was about to face something that should have destroyed it forever. In 1871, Chicago burned. Not just a building or a block, the whole city. Flames ripped through wooden streets and houses, leaving rubble and ash in their wake. It was devastation on a scale almost unimaginable for that time. And yet, instead of dying, Chicago rose. It came back stronger, bigger, and hungrier than ever. And that's the story we're going to tell tonight. We'll walk through muddy pre-fire streets, stand in the heat of the Great Chicago Fire itself, ride the trains that carried grain and cattle across the country, and slip into the crowded tenements where immigrant families lived shoulder to shoulder. So get comfortable, maybe grab a drink, and let's roll back the clock to Chicago, 150 years ago, a city still finding its voice and about to prove to the world just how unbreakable it could be. So let's start at the very beginning. Chicago wasn't always the roaring metropolis we know today. Step back to the 1870s, and you'd barely recognize it. Instead of towering steel skyscrapers, the city had wooden streets, modest clapboard houses, and the ever-present smell of Lake Michigan, mingling with smoke from countless chimneys. Imagine walking down a main street and seeing nothing taller than a two-story building, with horse-drawn carts clattering along uneven dirt roads, mud sloshing underfoot after a rain. And yes, winter could be brutal. The lake breeze cut through thick wool coats like a knife, and snow often buried the streets in a white blanket that made daily life slower, harder, and honestly, a little miserable. But the people of Chicago were used to tough weather, tougher work, and the feeling that life wasn't going to wait for them. They had to chase it. Now, the town's location was strategic. Nestled on the southwestern shore of Lake Michigan, Chicago had access to waterways, which made it a hub for trade and transport. Ships would dock, unloading goods that would soon make their way inland. Farmers, traders, and early entrepreneurs quickly realized that this town was more than a place to live. It could be a gateway to opportunity, and opportunity, back then, was everything. Most streets were bustling, with a mix of horse carts, small wooden wagons, and the occasional early steam engine. On any given day, you'd hear the clop-clop of hooves, mixing with the low rumble of engines. Shopkeepers would sweep in front of their stores. Kids ran along dirt paths, kicking up clouds of dust. And neighbors waved at each other over fences, Life was simple, yes, but also hard, and sometimes chaotic. The city's population was growing fast. Immigrants arrived in waves, bringing languages, foods, traditions, and skills that would shape Chicago for generations. The Irish, Germans, Poles, Italians, and Scandinavians all had their communities, creating a rich tapestry of culture. Imagine the streets alive with multiple languages, smells of fresh bread from bakeries, and the sound of accordion or violin drifting from open windows. Every neighborhood had its own rhythm, and every alley had a story. Families lived in the wooden tenements or small brick houses. Most homes were functional, not fancy, and indoor plumbing was still a luxury for many. In some neighborhoods, families shared kitchens or courtyards with their neighbors. Children played in the streets, dodging wagons, and learning early lessons about cooperation, conflict, and survival. Workdays were long and exhausting. Men labored in small shops, docks, or warehouses, while women managed households, cooked meals, and sometimes took in extra sewing or laundry work to help make ends meet. One of the town's charms and challenges was its connection to Lake Michigan. Fishermen would rise before dawn to bring in their catch. Sailboats dotted the horizon, and the lake itself was a source of commerce, recreation, and even danger during storms. The wind could whip up waves that smashed docks, and ice in winter made transport treacherous. But for the residents, the lake was life, water, food, and a reminder that even a small town could reach outward toward the world. And yet, despite its beauty and promise, Chicago was still rough around the edges. Fires were common because most buildings were wooden. Heating came from open flames, and safety regulations were few. Streets were muddy in rain, dusty in sun. Disease occasionally spread quickly, and the harsh winters added to the hardships. Life was an ongoing balance between opportunity and risk. By the mid-1870s, Chicago had started to emerge as more than just a small town on a lake. Railroads had begun to crisscross the landscape, connecting the city to the rest of the country. Trade routes brought in goods from the east and exported products from the Midwest. The town was no longer isolated. It was part of a network that would feed and supply the growing nation. And this connectivity was laying the foundation for the city to face one of the defining events in its history, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. But before that catastrophic blaze, life in Chicago had its own rhythm. People woke early, worked hard, and socialized in small cafes, markets, and town squares. Neighborhoods were close-knit, and survival often depended on community support. Families relied on each other in ways that modern city dwellers might not even imagine, sharing resources, helping with chores, or lending a hand during illness or economic hardship. In the evenings, the streets would quiet down. Lamps flickered to life in front of homes, and the city had a gentle glow against the backdrop of the lake. Smoke from chimneys, mixed with the scent of bread from bakeries and stew from taverns. Children would scurry home from playing in the alleys, dogs would bark, and neighbors would exchange the day's news. It was a small town on the cusp of transformation, and nobody quite knew how big Chicago would become. All right, so now we reach the moment that would change Chicago forever. I'm talking about the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Before we dive in, imagine a crisp October evening. The air is dry, the wind is picking up off Lake Michigan, and most of the city's buildings, mostly wooden, are stacked close together, waiting like kindling. Sounds peaceful, right? Until it isn't. It all started in a small barn on the city's southwest side. Legend says a cow kicked over a lantern. Some say it was a spark from a fireplace. Whatever the cause, that night fire ignited. And it didn't just burn a house or a block. It engulfed the city like a living thing. Flames leapt across streets, devoured roofs, and sent embers flying like fiery insects in the wind. Now, imagine being a resident back then. People woke to the crackle and roar of fire, smoke thick in the sky, glowing orange through the windows. Families scrambled, grabbing what little they could carry. Blankets, a few dishes, children clinging to parents' hands. Horses panicked, wagons overturned, and the narrow wooden streets amplified the chaos. The fire spread fast. Strong winds pushed the flames into the heart of the city. Buildings that had taken years to build were reduced to ash in hours. Wooden sidewalks, fences, and homes became fuel. Even the city's water supply struggled to keep up. Hoses broke, pumps failed, and the fire leapt across the streets like it had a mind of its own. The night was terrifying. People reported seeing fire as far as the horizon. Streets were impassable, and smoke choked lungs and eyes. Families huddled in Lake Michigan where they could, shivering in the cold water, watching their city burn. The panic, fear, and uncertainty were unimaginable. Some climbed onto rooftops, others into wagons. Firefighters, exhausted and under-equipped, battled valiantly, but they were fighting a storm of flame, not just wood. When the fire finally burned out, after nearly 3 days, the destruction was staggering. About 4 square miles of the city lay in ruins. Tens of thousands of buildings were destroyed. Nearly 100,000 people were left homeless. The skyline Chicago residents had known was gone, and yet, despite this devastation, something remarkable happened. Chicagoers didn't give up. They looked at the ash and the charred ruins and thought, "We can do better. We will do better." The rebuilding effort began almost immediately. Architects, builders, and city planners saw this as a chance to remake the city stronger, safer, and more modern. Fire-resistant materials, like brick and stone, became standard. Streets were widened, and building codes were tightened. The city that rose from the flames would be faster, higher, and more ambitious than ever before. And while the fire caused immense suffering, it also created opportunity. Investors came in, new industries were born, railroads were expanded. Chicago became the hub for meatpacking, manufacturing, and trade. The fire, while tragic, cleared space for the city to grow and modernize in ways that might not have been possible otherwise. But let's not forget the human side. Thousands lost everything. Families who had been living in tenements suddenly had nothing. Neighbors helped neighbors. Strangers sheltered strangers. And churches and charitable organizations poured in aid. The resilience and determination of the people became the city's defining feature. You can almost feel the energy if you imagine walking through the ashes. The smell of smoke lingers. Soot covers what remains. But somewhere in the distance, hammers strike, saws cut, and the first brick buildings start to rise. Children play among the rubble, oblivious to the danger, while adults plan, calculate, and rebuild. Life continues because it must, because hope doesn't burn. And here's the wild part. Just a decade later, the city was unrecognizable. Where fire had consumed, towering brick buildings and steel-framed structures now stood. Chicago became a symbol of human resilience, ingenuity, and ambition. The fire was terrible, yes, but it forced the city to reinvent itself, creating a foundation for growth that would make it one of America's most important cities. As we walk through this story, imagine yourself among the crowds. Feel the heat of the fire, the panic, the courage, and then the determination. Picture families pulling wagons through smoky streets, neighbors passing buckets of water, children clinging to blankets, and then, slowly, see the horizon changing. Smoke dissipates, brick and stone rise, streets widen, and the city prepares for its next chapter, feeding America with its railroads and meatpacking plants, and welcoming immigrants from all over the world. This is not just a story about destruction. It's about rebirth. It's about a city that could have been lost to history, but chose to come back stronger. And it's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's room for hope, planning, and the sheer determination to rebuild. All right, now that we've walked through the fire and seen Chicago rise from the ashes, let's turn our attention to what really put this city on the map: meatpacking and the railroads. Because if Chicago's fire tested its resilience, the industries that followed tested its ambition, and they would shape not just the city, but the entire nation. Imagine stepping into Chicago in the 1870s, a few years after the fire. The city is alive with energy, smoke rising from chimneys, streets still a little dusty, but bustling with commerce. Rail lines crisscross the city like veins, carrying goods, animals, and people. Steam locomotives whistle, spitting clouds of smoke into the crisp air. At the docks and stockyards, men shout, carts rattle, and horses strain under heavy loads. This is a city that works hard and works loud. Now, the meatpacking industry. Picture the Union stockyards, which had become the beating heart of Chicago's economy. Thousands of cattle and pigs arrive every week, herded through gates, stamped, weighed, and sent down alleyways lined with workers. The scene is chaotic, but precise. Butchers, with knives flashing, men moving carcasses onto wagons, steam rising from boilers. The work is dirty, exhausting, and often dangerous, but the output is staggering. Meat processed here feeds not just Chicago, but cities across the country, and the workers, immigrants primarily, make it happen. Irish, German, Polish, and later Italian immigrants take on the hardest jobs. Imagine men standing in cold, wet conditions, slicing, packing, moving carcasses, while women sort, clean, and prepare sides for shipping. Children sometimes run errands in the stockyards or help with small chores at home. Life is grueling, but there's a sense of purpose. These families are part of something bigger, feeding America. At the same time, the railroads are the city's arteries. Trains arrive and depart constantly, connecting Chicago to every major city in the United States. Freight cars are packed with grain, livestock, processed meat, and manufactured goods. Passenger trains carry hopeful immigrants, businessmen, and travelers looking to catch the next opportunity. Imagine standing on a platform, the rumble of wheels shaking the ground, the hiss of steam, the smell of coal in the air. The railroads don't just transport goods, they transport dreams. And these industries transformed the city physically. Stockyards and slaughterhouses took up huge swaths of land, reshaping neighborhoods. The smell, the noise, and the sheer scale of the work changed the rhythm of daily life. Families living nearby had to adjust. Some benefited from employment opportunities. Others endured long hours of odors and chaos. Yet this industry made Chicago the economic powerhouse of the Midwest. Evenings in the meatpacking district are a sight to behold. Men still working late, lanterns glowing, shadows stretching across brick walls, smokestacks puffing into the dusky sky, while street vendors sell food to tired laborers. Pigeons circle overhead, and the faint sound of a train whistle echoes across the yards. Life continues relentlessly. There is no pause, because demand never stops. America has to eat, and Chicago provides. Now, imagine the social aspect. Workers live in dense tenements nearby, cramped apartments with shared kitchens, narrow hallways, and small courtyards. Families are tight-knit out of necessity, neighbors relying on each other for childcare, meals, and moral support. Every day is a challenge. Surviving winter, surviving illness, surviving long hours in factories and stockyards. But amid the struggle, there's humor, music, and community. Children play stickball in alleys. Women gossip over windowsills, and men gather at small taverns after a long shift. The railroads and meatpacking industry are intertwined with everyday life. The city grows vertically and horizontally. Roads are widened, bridges built, freight depots constructed. Chicago is no longer just a small town on the lake. It's a city with national reach, and this infrastructure allows for innovation. Refrigerated rail cars, standardized shipping, and centralized slaughterhouses. It's efficient, revolutionary, and unapologetically industrial. But let's not forget the human cost. Working conditions are harsh, injuries are common, long hours, low pay, and minimal safety regulations make life difficult. Diseases can spread in the tight tenements, yet the immigrants persevere. They come here with nothing, driven by hope, and build the backbone of the city's economy. Their culture, food, language, and traditions weave into the fabric of Chicago, giving the city a rich, layered identity. And it's not all gloom. The city has energy, ambition, and a sense of possibility. Steam engines, smokestacks, and shouting stockyard workers paint a picture of determination. Chicago is alive, a machine of human endeavor and ingenuity. The fire might have destroyed the past, but now the people are constructing the future. One railcar, one carcass, one family at a time. As night falls, imagine the glow of lanterns in the yards, the whistle of a departing train, the soft chatter from tenements, and the faint laughter of children playing near the docks. Chicago sleeps lightly, if at all. It's a city that never stops, a city that feeds a nation, and a city that thrives on energy, grit, and unyielding ambition. By the late 1870s, Chicago is no longer just a recovering town. It's a hub of commerce, labor, and transportation. The stockyards continue to expand. Railroads sprawl outward, like veins connecting the Midwest to the entire country. Immigrant communities grow, neighborhoods diversify, and the city's skyline begins to hint at the towering structures that will one day define it. So, when you think of Chicago today, its tall buildings, busy streets, and iconic skyline, remember that it all started with a small town on Lake Michigan, rebuilt from ashes, fueled by railroads, stocked by meatpacking, and powered by the hard work of countless immigrants. It's a story of resilience, ambition, and the sheer drive to survive and thrive. So now that we've seen Chicago rise from the ashes of the fire and fuel itself with meatpacking and railroads. It's time to walk through the streets and alleys, into the heart of the city, the tenements where immigrants lived, worked, and built their lives. This is where the human side of Chicago really comes alive. Picture a narrow alley in the 1870s. Wooden balconies lean precariously over cobblestone paths, laundry lines crisscross above, and children dart between adults, carrying buckets or firewood. Smoke from cooking fires mingles with the scent of fresh bread and hot coffee from street vendors. The walls of the tenements are worn, peeling, sometimes leaning slightly from years of settling, but they hold families together. Most residents are recent arrivals: Irish, German, Polish, Italian, and Scandinavian immigrants crowd into small apartments, often sharing a single room with multiple family members. Kitchens are shared. Hallways echo with chatter, and the faint strains of music float from windows. Life is cramped, noisy, and difficult, but it's alive. Work dominates the day. Men head to the stockyards, factories, or docks. Women manage households, often taking in sewing, laundry, or childcare for extra income. Children help out when they can, running errands, carrying packages, or looking after younger siblings. Imagine the city coming alive with movement, wagons clattering, street vendors calling out, factory whistles signaling breaks, and trains rumbling in the distance. Chicago is a symphony of labor, and everyone has a part to play. Even in hardship, there's community. Neighbors share food, swap advice, and celebrate small victories together. Holidays bring street gatherings, music, and improvised games for children. Kitchens are filled with the aromas of home cooking: pierogi from Polish households, sausages and breads from German families, pasta and tomato sauce from Italians. This shared culture turns the tenements into vibrant neighborhoods rather than just cramped spaces. But life is tough. Disease spreads quickly in the crowded conditions. Plumbing is limited. Water is often shared or delivered from street pumps. Fires are a constant threat in wooden buildings, and winter brings cold that seeps through thin walls. Work is exhausting. Wages are low, and hours are long. Yet, despite these hardships, families persevere, driven by hope and determination. Children grow up fast in these conditions. They learn early about responsibility, survival, and community. Many attend local schools, though class sizes are large and resources limited. Some work alongside their parents in factories or markets, gaining skills that will serve them in adulthood. Play happens in alleys and streets, using sticks, hoops, or makeshift balls. Laughter and shouts echoing off brick walls. Churches and social organizations play a critical role. They offer support, education, and a sense of identity. Immigrant communities often center around parishes or cultural associations, where language, traditions, and customs are preserved. Festivities and festivals bring color and music into the otherwise gray and busy streets. Evenings bring a mix of exhaustion and social life. Families gather around a small stove or lamp, sharing meals and stories from the day. Neighbors talk from the windows or doorways. Music drifts through the streets. An accordion, a violin, or children singing. The city's rhythm slows slightly, but only enough for a moment's respite before the next day's labor begins. And here's something fascinating. Despite hardship, Chicago's tenement life breeds resilience, creativity, and connection. People find ways to make small joys meaningful, whether it's a shared meal, a makeshift playground in a courtyard, or a street performance. This life forms the backbone of the city, supplying both the workforce and the spirit that keeps Chicago moving forward. As the sun sets over Lake Michigan, casting orange and pink light across rooftops and smokestacks, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the city. Children still play, families still cook, workers return home exhausted but proud. The tenements are crowded, yes, but they are full of life, culture, and hope. This is Chicago, not as a symbol of industry or commerce, but as a home for people who dared to come here with nothing and built something enduring. And when you step back and look at the city as a whole, you see the story. A city that burned, rose, fed a nation, and thrived through the hard work and determination of immigrants. Chicago's greatness wasn't built by a single fire, factory, or train line. It was built by countless families and communities living, working, and dreaming together. So tonight, as you imagine the streets of 1870s Chicago, picture the tenements alive with conversation, music, and the scent of home-cooked meals. Picture the immigrant workers heading to stockyards or factories, their faces tired but resolute. Picture children playing in alleyways, learning the lessons of life and survival. This is the city's heart, and it beats just as strongly today, shaped by the sacrifices and dreams of those who came before.